Our education system, by and large, is not designed to create free thinking entrepreneurs. It's designed to create worker bees, or people who conform. And that's probably a bigger discussion for another day. But I think we have to recognize as parents and as society that that's not for everybody. And we've gotten past the industrial age where we need to have just a bunch of worker bees, right? We're way past that. I think it's time that we start focusing more on critical thinking skills, freedom, free thinking, and entrepreneurial mindset.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Flywheel Effect, where we're sponsored by Vital. Vital is your source for business excellence and upping your game to make sure that you're able to run your business as opposed to being stuck in your business. And we're along here with my co-host, Matt Bernath. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Brent. Excited for what's going to end up being a fun weekend and moving my oldest daughter out to Ole Miss starting on Sunday.
You gonna cry?
I don't know. She was asking me that yesterday, and I tend to have delayed emotions. Like, I will get through whatever I need to get through, and then probably on the airplane, I have a feeling as well, I'm going to fall apart.
Is she going to cry?
She might. I think she's excited. I'm really excited for her. There's going to be a bunch of growth and new opportunities and everything. So, yeah, I mean, who knows? Sometimes my emotions will just hit me and I get surprised by them. But I'd be really surprised if I don't cry. I will miss her.
So I don't know if it's as big a deal out west, but here on the East Coast, the SEC is just smoking hot as far as, not the people, I'm not talking smoking hot that way, smoking hot as far as being colleges where people want to attend. I think it's good value. You getting the education at the SEC is dramatically improved over the past 10 years. You have a good time, and it's everybody's talking about it. Are they doing this? Is it the same thing in California?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I don't know that there's a value for us, paying full out-of-state commission or out-of-state tuition, but for her, it's all about the football, the sports, and Greek life, which is top of the list for her.
It's scary for you.
Yes. But it's a fun place. I'm looking forward to hearing the stories, and she has a couple of girlfriends that are a year ahead of her that are trailblazing on her behalf, and excited to have some guidance for her while she's out there.
Yeah, the reason it's hot, it's a good value for the East is the Northeast is more of a private school world, right? There's obviously state universities in every state, but they don't kind of dominate the landscape like they do out west. In California, you got the UC system, the Cal State system, the Polytechnic ones. There's a ton. But here, so the difference in value between going to a private university in the Northeast or going to a public in the SEC, even though you're paying out-of-state tuition, you're still going to save $80,000 over 4 years.
It's insane. It's so insane.
Totally,
yeah,
totally
it's insane. Difference between $200,000 and $300,000, which are ridiculous numbers when you think about them.
And for me, it will be the difference between $500,000 and $1 million or $1.2 million in 15 years. So That's what I got to look forward to.
Yep. And yours will be going through it at the exact same time.
Exactly. So that's why I doubled those numbers. So cool. Well, we have another interesting episode here. We have this second edition of our ongoing book discussion series, trying to bring up some interesting books that can be applicable, but also a fun read. And today is my choice of a book that's been published in the last, and just frame reference, we're doing 4 books this year. 2 books are going to be one chosen by me, one chosen by Matt, that's published in the last several years, a recent book. And then a second book each of us picked that was published sometime in the past, I think 10 years or more historically. So this is, what was the name of the first one we did? That was your more recent book, Matt. How to Coach.
Yeah. Yep. The coaching book. Yep.
I cannot remember the name of that book. We'll still put it in the notes.
Nor can I. It's on my shelf here, though, I'm sure.
Let's take a look. You got it? Apparently not. You did just move. So maybe it didn't make it. That was a pretty fun book. It was a totally different book than I would have read otherwise.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Coach the person, not the problem.
Coach the person, not the problem. Great book for managers to learn how to make their people better. Now, today is my recent book, and this is little bit of an oddball of a business book. It's called How to Make a Few Billion Dollars by Brad Jacobs. We'll get into a second with who Brad Jacobs is, which is a pretty interesting guy. But that title just floored me. It's such a casual statement of something that is the pinnacle of extraordinary success.
Right.
And it's like, and how can I not want to read it? I mean, did you get the same feeling from that, Matt?
I did. And, what's interesting, I think these days when you look at billionaires or people that become billionaires fairly quickly, they're usually tech related. And he has tech threaded through a couple of his later ventures. But for the most part, these were services businesses that he started. Yeah. And I love that, I don't want to give too many things away, but the casual title, also that casual nature of the way he talks about making billions of dollars is just present throughout the entire book. Which he's just like, hey, when you're ready, and in 4 years we got to be, $5 billion company. I'm like, it's amazing the way that he casually talks about those things.
So we'll get into the book, but let me give a quick rundown of who Brad Jacobs is. So most of you probably will never have heard of him. He's got some really good lessons. So he is this consummate entrepreneur. Back in the late 70s, he started his first business called Amerix Oil Associates. It was an oil trading business based in London. And what it did is identified arbitrage opportunities between trading different geographies. He was able to buy something for one, trade it somewhere else, make the spread. And that model of just figuring out the rough spot in the market is what allowed him to turn it into $1 billion. So he was worth billions of dollars within a few years. So he did that. Then he goes on to do it again. 10 years later, he forms United Waste Systems and just started buying dumpster companies and built that into second largest waste management company in the country behind Waste Management. He then did it again, and he formed United Rentals, and he started literally renting industrial equipment. So like the equipment that goes on to a construction project, just equipment rentals. Did it again, built that. Then he went out and made XPO, another one, $1 billion. This is logistics. So basically just third-party logistics and transportation brokerage. These are basic businesses. These are things that all of us deal with every day. Waste, equipment, logistics. Oil trading's a little different, but still it's a standard business that he still turned into massive success. All of these companies, he turned into multi-billion-dollar companies, took them public in an incredibly short period of time. 5 years every one of them within 5 years or fewer, he was worth well over $1 billion. That company was worth well over $1 billion from the start. So he's got some sauce on how to take something that is ordinary and find the opportunities, differentiate himself, and create massive success. And so that's how he could talk about making a few $1 billion so casually. So give you a little framework on him. But now let's get into it. Matt, where would you like to start? I know there's probably a couple things in here in the beginning that resonated with you, because I think what he does is unlike a technical how-to book, and this is a how-to book, he's more talking about culture, perception, and people, which to you is always top of mind.
So what I found was interesting about this is months ago, you and I decided this would be one of the 4 books that we read. The team at Vital also recently decided to read this book in the book club. I had been procrastinating on reading the book, not for any good reason, other than I had a bunch of other books that I was already in the process of reading. So I literally binged this book over 2 weeks. And it just so happened that I aligned with the Vital team on the first chapter. So they read the first chapter while I was reading the first chapter, and I didn't make the book club meeting, but after the fact, they explained to me, wow, we thought this book was going to be so businessy, but it's heartfelt and love vibes. And it's funny, the first chapter is all about love vibes. I mean, that's right. That's pretty much what it's about, right? And so the team was like, wow, we thought this book would be totally different. Well, of course, chapters 2 through 6 or 7, however many there were, are very different than the first one. But I thought there were a lot of great lessons, I guess, in the first chapter about, asking questions differently. One of them specifically was, rather than asking somebody, hey, how was your day? It's like, what was the happiest part of your day? And he used the analogy of using this question in, at home and at work. He also brought up thought experiments and this concept of feeling the brain, which is a little bit of a meditative practice. And when one looks at a billionaire founder CEO, you probably don't connect meditative process and love vibes immediately with somebody like that.
Not at all. And that, you circle around to something about you talked about love and what was the best part of your day. But first, let me give you a relation that maybe people don't pick up on as much when you read this book. Is, there's the anecdote of him speaking to his music teacher from college, that the music teacher questioned what he accomplished in the world because he abandoned his musical world. And it's something where he was extraordinary to him, because how could you question his success? And somebody just figured out how. But the important thing is where he went to college. So when you think of most business people, you think of them, people in their minds as, hey, they had a business education, a very practical education. You went to school to do a job, to do things. He didn't. He went to a college called Bennington College in southern Vermont, in Bennington, Vermont. Now, Bennington, Vermont is Bennington College is a very particular place. And I'll give you my little story about Bennington. So when I was looking at colleges, my grandfather was looking at Vermont, and I went up to Vermont with him for a week. And I went to 4 colleges. I went to Middlebury, Dartmouth, Williams, and then Bennington. Ultimately went to Middlebury. Dartmouth and Williams actually didn't interest me that much. But when I went to Bennington, I drove on campus. And this was 1993. And there was more blue hair on that campus than I'd ever seen in my entire life. Right? This was a place full of completely diverse personalities and types of people, incredibly artistic, counterculture in every single way. They didn't have grades. They don't have grades. They don't study anything other than the how to think and how to breathe, which I love the kind of education, but I couldn't handle blue hair. So I said, I'm not going to Bennington. I don't even have to have my visit. I'm moving on. The blue hair wasn't for me. So, but what it does have is it's the focus of an education is on music, education for education's self, art for art's sake, for the things that turn a mind into a creative engine of thought, analysis, and growth. That's what it's about. It's not about, I'm going to take accounting to become an accountant. And that's where that mental thought process of think of everybody that loves, think about your music, seeps into everything he does. And actually makes him a lot more effective, right? It's like, the world is not linear in its progressions of what leads to the next opportunity, the next success. Sometimes it's breath, creativity, and imagination that allow you to find the opportunities that other people don't. And I think that he embodies that in a really dramatic way. So
yeah, I agree. And I think that's what has allowed him to be such a futurist and figure out the trends, which is really what he talks about in chapter 2 is getting the trend right. And that was a chapter that I found the most interesting, is, how most of his success has been about trend spotting and optimizing his businesses around what he thinks is going to happen and making bets against those. And I think there's a piece there's probably 3 things at work, right? There's confidence, intelligence, and critical thinking that he probably developed, in life, but also through some of that education. And what I found interesting is he never actually finished college, right?
Nope.
He went to Bennington for 18 months or so, and then Brown, and decided Brown wasn't for him. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, really. And I thought that was fascinating. He went to Brown because his whole family went there, and I think he had a lot of pressure. But the structure of a traditional college experience just wasn't for him. Brown's great, it's an Ivy League, but it wasn't for him. I think if he could have had his druthers, he probably would have preferred to have stayed at Bennington for 4 years. But that wasn't for him. I mean, he left Brown and went to go start this trading, Emmerich Trading, which was just bonkers. It's a kind of example of Bill Gates leaving Harvard to do Microsoft, but a little different. I think it's almost a similar story, but a different angle. So
and I think it highlights, you and I have talked about this a number of times. It highlights that, our education system, by and large, is not designed to create free thinking entrepreneurs. It's designed to create worker bees, or people who conform. And that's probably a bigger discussion for another day. But I think we have to recognize as parents and as society that that's not for everybody. And we've gotten past the industrial age where we need to have just a bunch of worker bees, right? We're way past that. I think it's time that we start focusing more on critical thinking skills, freedom, free thinking, and entrepreneurial mindset.
I'm okay taking this conversation this direction with this, because I think it kind of lends itself to what is how the only way to make a few $1 billion is to think differently than others. I think that's what he's identifying here, is you have to think differently and look at opportunity in a way that is not conformist, that is not the way that everybody else does. And that's the only way to make outside success. If you want to be moderately successful, you could follow the path. Lots of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. But I think your point is, what drives our society forward is a balance between worker bees and nonconformists that have truly step function change in the way things operate. And I think we have to cultivate those more. I think I look at my children, and the number one characteristic as 3-year-olds that I want to, my wife wants them to be kind. That's her number one. My number one's curiosity. I can be kind or not, like whatever. I know, just kidding. I'd rather them be kind. I like them to be resilient. I want them to be curious, and I want them to be resilient. And those are the characteristics. But curiosity is more than just, hey, what's that? It's that intellectual curiosity that leads you to think deeper about problems. And I think to your point, I don't think our education system's focused on that right now. It's more focused, and I think part of it's because it's gotten so expensive. It makes it hard. When things are so expensive, it makes it much harder to be experimental.
You feel like you have more at risk.
There's a ton at risk. So, the loss, in my personal soapbox, the loss of the humanities across so many universities and the lack of interest in them is a bad thing for our society. Because if we're just going to be teaching the skills for the first job, we lose the critical thinking skills and talents that allow the transformative thought, which is really what makes a difference. And I think that
I agree.
So
and I think what is also at play here is the fact that we've become such a consuming society, right? How much time do we spend consuming others' content versus being creators ourselves? I think how much I love Ben Franklin. I just recently watched a great documentary, PBS documentary on Ben Franklin, watched it on the airplane, that was directed by, it'll come to me, but he's a very famous photographer, and I didn't realize that he directed some of these documentaries. But anyway, one thing I learned new about Ben Franklin was that he had a quote that said, either write things worth reading or do things worth the writing about, right? And I think that connects a little bit to the creative aspect of us as human beings. Like, all of us have this innate creativity at different levels and different stages. But I think the education system and parenting in general, I think, is not creating space for that or letting people experiment with it. And because we consume so much, when we do create, we end up creating a lot of the same stuff because it's what we've already been watching, right? Like, we're filling our heads with all these things. And I think the other piece that's missing today is the confidence building that happens when we take risks and we fail.
Yeah.
Right. Or when we succeed. And to your point, whether it's a money thing or some, there's probably many aspects to it. There's not as much risk-taking behavior in young people, like healthy risk-taking in young people, where they feel like they can fail and be okay with it. I've talked to a lot of young people who just feel like they're so far off the path that they don't have flexibility to take risk, which is unfortunate because the risk taking is what helps to build the confidence.
I mean, risk is everything in life in some ways. You don't experience anything new. Like, I think and I guess that curiosity, that risk taking is something I'm also trying to build into my kids. Maybe not as much risk as I take sometimes, with the things that I do. I think I do things.
Yeah.
If there's a question of when does risk fall into stupid, and I don't always know that line myself, which you're familiar with, Matt. But yeah, I agree. Like, and as young father of young children, I think about this a lot. Like, I do not want to snowplow everything for my children. I want to let them succeed or fail when the actual risk and stakes are low. And I think it's part of it is a recognition of what are the potential outcomes, and are those potential outcomes okay? Like, I have friends that literally, it's not just an Ivy League school, but unless their kid goes to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, and maybe MIT, everything's a failure. Like, I have the conversation with them all the time, and I'm like, they are going to be fine. Then I have other friends. And for me, obviously I'm educated, but I honestly don't care if my son or daughter want to go to college as long as they do something productive at that point in life. Like, look, if they're not going to college and not sitting on the couch watching TV, they better get the rest to work. But it's not a detail of my success as a parent of that they went to a college that is deemed appropriate by my cohort of friends. Like, I don't care. So that's a risk, but eliminate that risk. You open up a world of possibilities. So I try to have my kids eat something new several times a week. It's a risk. They may not like it. Sometimes I give them something spicy that burns their tongue, but at least they try it. You know?
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And I mean, that aligns with kind of who you are and where you come from. And I think the interesting thing, when it comes down to parenting is, as parents, we have a vision for what we think our kids could or should be. But the reality is, like, every human is just so unique that I think there's not many places today to foster that uniqueness. There are still some schools that do that, but I think by and large, even from early elementary school, it's like, here's the box we want you to play in this box, and when you play outside of that box, you're in trouble. And I think it teaches kids. There's a huge epidemic of anxiety and depression, right? We know that. There's connections to cell phones, there's connections to, our diet, there's connections to other things. But if you peel back the layers, there's a huge connection to kids not feeling like they're enough. And now, granted, the official education starts at 5 or 6, and some of the mental health issues start before that. But if a kid is going into school already struggling to feel like he or she can be loved just as they are, then they get into school and they start playing outside of the box and getting in trouble. That makes them even more concerned about their self-esteem and self-worth and whatnot. So, I mean, I think we need to, as a society, start unpacking that. We need to, as parents, start unpacking that and saying, hey, you know what? How much of this mental health epidemic is related to our education system?
And in education, but also the parenting side, right? Like, I think what you're pointing to is it's that box. What it also, and the box is just not just school, but parents put them in the box too. You're going to be structured. We're going to do structured play dates. You're going to be watched every second. There's no agency. So agency is all about, without agency, you cannot be your own human. You cannot be able to find things that give you joy and opportunity. Find your places of risk. That agency, and it's really interesting. So, like, the mental health epidemic, I actually believe the answer is less support, while everybody wants to provide more. Like, more is not always better. Sometimes we have to let people go and breathe, right? If you hug too tight, like in Mice and Men, was it Lenny? He killed the mouse. Why? Because he hugged it too tight. We hug our kids too tight. Let them go. My wife gets mad at me sometimes, like, watch the kids. And I'm like, I am watching the kids. And he said, no, you're not. You're not engaging with them. And I said, yeah, I'm letting them do their own thing. Let them figure it out. Like, I just want them to figure it out. I don't have to do something with them and give them direction. I want them to find their own games, like, purposefully disengage. So I guess that was a good segue, Matt. I think but this gets back to Brad Jacobs. He had this different level of freedom in his mind, driven by whatever it was, that allowed him to recognize opportunity and trends in such a dramatically different way from anybody. And before we kind of get there, that's chapter 2. And I think chapter 2 is really important, as you pointed out. I want to circle back to chapter 1. And you mentioned something about how he said, ask the question, what was the best thing in your day or favorite part of your day? Because how was your day gives opportunity for negativity. That question of positivity, of the positive, is a focus on the positive. And I'm bringing this up because this relates to my favorite comic strip, literal favorite comic strip. And it's a comic strip called Soup to Nuts. Guy Rick Stromowski wrote it. And there's this one strip that he has. And there's two strips, actually. Go to the first one. And the strip is a kid wakes up late, misses his alarm, spills his breakfast. The next thing is a bird poops on his head at the bus stop. He misses the bus. He gets an F on his test. And then the second to last panel is he's waiting for the bus to go home, and he looks up and he sees a cardinal. And okay, great, saw a cardinal in the tree. And so the last panel is his mom asking him, "How was your day?" He very easily could have said it was terrible. All this range of awfulness happened to him. He said, "It was great. I saw a cardinal." Right. So he answered the question in the way, "What's the best part of your day?" without even thinking of it. But it was like so perfect. And like I have a bird feeder, and so any day I see a cardinal in the back, I know it's a good day. There's another one, has the girl is in this, and she has the best day ever. She wakes up on time. She looks beautiful. She gets an A on her test. She gets the best seat on the bus, all this stuff. And then the second to last panel, she breaks a nail. The mom asks when she gets home, "Oh, how was your day?" "Terrible. I broke a nail." And so it was like she couldn't win. But it was like those two comics kind of really, for me, kind of highlight, like, just ask about the best thing, and that's what you're going to get. If you ask about how, often you're going to get something different. So that's just my little, I had the comic strip pinned to my room. And actually, my wife knew I loved it so much. She called Rick Stromowski, and she got the original large format panel of the boy with the cardinal and had him sign it. So I have this on my walls, the whole large format cardinal.
Wow. Damn, that's awesome.
It's my positivity. That's the image of positivity for me.
Yep. That's awesome.
So anyway,
I think what you just described also highlights an important fact that as humans, we generally remember the first and the last thing in some range of experiences,
Yep.
right? And so that tracks.
Exactly. It was sometimes comics just hit psychology perfectly.
I love comics and comedy because the best part, like most humans don't really want to talk about the awkward shit. And, comics and comedians are just always willing to talk about the awkward stuff, right? And some of the best comics out there are just like, they're just willing to break it open and say, almost expose the lies that most of us walk around with. Like, oh yeah, everything's good, everything's fine. Like, what about this obnoxious, crazy, ridiculous stuff that happens every single day? Why are we not laughing at it? Why are we not talking about it? And just being able to see the ridiculousness of our days is pretty fun.
Life would be less fun without comedy pointing out our hypocrisy and stupidity. So 100% agree. That's why South Park's been on for 28 years now.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it was 97. It was the first South Park. It's nuts. A long time. Does time screw with you, Matt? Like when you think about how far back 25, 30 years is in time, and then think about your frame of reference of like, you're not approximately the same age, you're a little bit younger. It's called the late 80s, thinking back to the ancient history that was Vietnam War, for example, right? Then when I was thinking about that, it was 15 fucking years. Now that's 2010, which seems like yesterday.
Yeah. Right. Time totally screws with me. I mean, we think about, especially at our age and how many summers you have left, or how much more time you have left with your loved ones or whatever. I mean, that's part of it. But also, I constantly see that myself and others, we overestimate what we can get done in a year. We set these ridiculous goals in 12 months. And then we underestimate what we can get done in like 3 to 5 years, right? And so I think what ends up happening is you get stuck in that cycle of beating yourself up for not hitting your annual goals. And then 5 years later, you look back and say, wow, I should have accomplished more than I actually did. Where, if we're setting more realistic 1-year goals and chewing away at some bigger 3 to 5 year goals, that tends to be, I think, a more successful approach and less shame around it too.
Yeah, goal setting goal setting's hard, but stuff gets in the way. But I think that's actually, reading through this book, Brad Jacobs' goal setting capabilities and how he structures his activities around that, even though they're kind of outlandish in some things he wants to do, is pretty extraordinary. Like when you look at, we're going to go buy every waste disposal company we could find, and he executes on like 300 transactions in a year. You're like, oh my God, you know how to keep yourself focused.
Yep. And he builds on that with a whole chapter around, I couldn't do this without the right team. And, you know, it wasn't Brad Jacobs buying 300 companies. It was, you know, his team executing all that. And I think there's a couple of criticisms I have for the book. If, you know, I mean, it was a great book. One criticism is, I think, going deeper on that team building or, you know, the team aspect, it would have been great. And I think he actually tried to cover, I mean, look, it's an ambitious feat to try to cover how to make a few $1 billion in just one book. And so I think that the other criticism is that he tries to cover a lot in one book.
Yeah, it's a little flippant.
And while I found it entertaining, I would have loved for him to dive deeper into the mindset stuff. And I would have loved to have him dive deeper into the team stuff, because frankly, that's what allowed him to do the rest of it. Like that whole M&A chapter could have almost been eliminated. I think his electric meetings chapter was useful. I think that the teams piece was useful. I think the love vibes piece was useful, and the trends was. So there was almost like a chapter there where I would have loved to see him replace that with more on mindset and team, because I'm certain those two things were really responsible for his success.
I don't think, you know, it's interesting. I don't think he short-circuited his team as much as you did from that. Like, I think that what he gets into, and I think there's two, maybe it's not building teams. I think he goes into fairly, in a decent way, about how to find and assess really good talent. Like, what are the attributes that you want to hire on? And he's not hiring on like 10 years of industry experience. He's hiring on, intelligence is his first cut. He wants people that are smart. He wants people that are hungry, that have ambition. He wants them to be honest and personable, right? Like those are the 4 things. And he says, okay. And I think what I think where we are is, and I don't think it's the team building that he didn't build enough. I think it's, what did the culture of his organizations look like? Because I think he finds that he's really good. He talks about, this is the kind of way I find people, but I don't think he talks about culture being important, but not how do I build a culture that is as high performing as I am in a way that can operate autonomously. And I think that's actually I think that's actually probably his superpower.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he touches on that in chapter 6 a little bit.
Right.
But I agree. I think, you know, again, if I was the editor of this book, I'd be like, hey, this whole M&A chapter, that's like a whole book in and of itself.
Which I love.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying I didn't like it. I'm saying it didn't seem to fit for me with the rest of the book. It was like a more sort of technical approach where the rest of it was fairly, well, I should say, most of the book to me felt strategic. That felt more tactical, that chapter. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean I didn't find it interesting, but it didn't feel to me like it was a fit for the rest of the book. I think better use of that space would have been, like you said, more focus on culture, you know, kind of like these are the things that unlocked our outsized success. The M&A stuff was just a function of that, but I don't think those M&A transactions would have been nearly as successful had he not had the right people and the right culture in place.
No, I agree. He wouldn't have. I did that. I think the difference that I'm seeing is the M&A that we're going to go basically be the Borg in every industry is a core component of his culture. And for those of you who don't know the Borg, it's a Star Trek Next Generation nerd reference of from some planet that they are half all cyborgs, half machine, half animal, and they basically just consume every civilization they encounter. And basically that's what he did. Like within his industries, he just consumed them. But I almost feel that that's, without it, his culture doesn't, that's the juice. That's the fuel for his cultures. And I think that's why he covered it. I think he didn't fit it in properly in describing it that way, but it's so core to what he does.
Oh, absolutely. And I think in that way it makes sense. But yeah, dude, like I said, that's where I don't feel like it fit, or there's so much to cover there. What was your favorite chapter and why?
I like the MSC chapter because I kind of like loved hearing his rationale. So that was funny. I liked his 2 things. I like the M&A chapter it didn't fit. I see that, but in my mind, it's what resonated the most. And I think the other chapter is chapter 2, talking about trends. I think that trend analysis is underrated, and you don't just have to be the first mover, but you have to get these directions right. And basically, I think and I think this is clear, is being massively wealthy, like he's talking about how to make a few $1 billion. You cannot do it unless you get the trends right. And the rest of it is it's not that it's easy, but it can fall into place if you do.
I think that was a great chapter too. My favorite chapter, or I should say the chapter that I got the most out of, it's a toss-up between 4 and 5, building a team and running electric meetings. I liked them both. But I think I got the most out of just the simplicity of him talking about the way he interviews people. Mm-hmm. And while I would have liked to have him expand that more into the culture piece, that I did get a lot out of that chapter. It was interesting in the way that I'm surprised that he even covered meetings in a book talking about billions of dollars, but that shows just how important communication is throughout an organization.
And he actually has a lot of meetings, right? Which is interesting. It's not, they're structured, but he has them regularly. It's not like, he's not anti-meeting. He just wants to make sure incredibly valuable, right? Like, I think that's where we encounter, everyone complains about meetings just because they waste everybody's time. If they don't waste everybody's time, they're great. But I think it's interesting, Matt. Like, and I think this gets the way we're looking at these two. I think gets into the different ways that we read books. And what do we mean by that? Is you're more of a technical person, like walk through things. I'm more of like, I just want to kind of understand thoughts and trends and pictures and stuff. Not that one's better than the other, but I think that what the chapters that you like were like, oh, wow, I can use these things for how I help manage my own teams. I think that's when you read those, that's kind of where you're looking at it. Like, I can use this. The two that I liked were more like, wow, that's really cool and fun. How does that change my generalized thinking about stuff? And it's the way we get different things out of books. And I think it's interesting that this book somehow did both.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting you point that out too. I think it identifies why I used to choose books based on people's recommendations, and then I would look at the number of reviews or whatever, and I'd say, oh, I think this is a good book for me. But now, because I have a never-ending list of books that I get recommended to me. Now, the way that I choose them is I actually read the reviews, because it points out what you just described. Now, I don't know the reviewer, but as they describe what they got out of the book, that gives me some sense for, can I see myself using this as a technical reference manual, or am I really just looking for a thought leadership piece or something that will change my perspective? Because there's different books. Like a lot of the books that I've read this year are not technical handbooks. They're very much personal growth and mindset stuff, which is about shifting perspectives and changing the way we look at things, and just internal shifts, which is very different than, hey, here's how you run a meeting, or hey, here's how you hire somebody.
Right. I would say I'd like you to take one more step, Matt. I'd like you to start every 5th book you read. This is not everywhere. Is read a novel for no reason other than people say it's written well. And the reason I say that is fiction and the way it unlocks areas of your brain, either to settle it down, open up pathways, think through things differently, visualize what you're reading, is, I think, an important thing that it really important that you don't get from most not kind of business kind of based nonfiction. You can get it from like a biography sometimes, but I think give it a shot. Read some more novels.
I do not read fiction, like purely just don't read it. I really enjoy biographies, and I do get some of that out of biographies, but I've now gotten to the habit. So I can usually be consuming 2 books at once. I'll have a hard copy. If it's a business book, I usually buy the hard copy. And then if it's a biography or a story type book, then it'll be an audiobook. But yeah, I never have enjoyed fiction, and that's an interesting idea. So what would be your first recommendation then, Brent?
Well, I guess it's really, recommendation's hard. It really depends on what you like. Now, if you want just something kind of fun and airy, there's a guy named Carl Hyacin. And maybe you saw the show on Apple TV called Bad Monkey. The book is really good. It's a story of this like down his luck detective in Florida with a little bit of voodoo stuff. But it's just he's a fun writer, and it just moves, and you'll be done within a weekend. If you like mysteries, if you like crime fiction, reading a Scott Turow or John Grisham are just easy reads too. Like, I'm not saying read literary fiction. Like, I read let me give you the last book I read. When my mind needs to settle on things, I'll pick up a novel, and I did that recently because I had some stuff going on, mentally, not problematic, but just too much. I read Watership Down. So, have you ever heard of Watership Down? Do you remember the Rabbit movie? Okay, this book was, and this story of Watership Down is really fascinating. This guy named Richard Adams wrote it, and it came out of, he used to tell stories to his girls about stuff. And one day he started telling stories about rabbits. And he told this long story over the course of multiple car rides about this whole fiction of rabbits in their society. And his girls loved it so much, they asked him to write it down. So then he turned this thing that we just for fun pastime in long car rides into a book. And it's the story of these rabbits kind of moving through their world and society and forming new society. And there's fights, and there's food, and there's starvation, all kinds of stuff. But it's just this wonderful, there's violence, pastoral book about rabbits in the English countryside. And it's been in print every year for over 50 years now, 1973, I think. And it's great. I love it. You can read that. It's different. I like science fiction. I also just read another Asimov book, which I tend to read too many of. So those are just some ideas. If you want, I'll send you something. Happy to send you.
Yeah, I would love it. It's funny, as you were just talking through that, I was thinking about what was the last fiction book that I read. And it was, and I don't know that this is the exact title, but I think it was How to Race in the Rain or Racing in the Rain. And at the time I was doing a bunch of racing, and a friend had recommended it to me. And it was, it was a little bit about racing, but it was more about this story, and they eventually made it into a movie, I believe. I freaking cried, reading this book. It was so sad and moving, and I actually really enjoyed it. So some emotions just came up for me as you were describing that, and I was remembering reading that book. I'm like, you know what? I did really enjoy that book. I struggled to put it down.
There's an emotional, when you read a good book and you can immerse yourself in it, there's an emotional and mental connection that is unlike anything you can get with nonfiction. If you want to cry, read The Kite Runner. Oh my God, it's about a boy in Afghanistan. You will cry your eyes out if you read The Kite Runner.
I'm not looking for any good excuses to cry, but yeah, send me something. I will read some novels here. That is a good back half of 2025 goal.
Yeah, just one or two. Not like every book.
Yep.
Right? Just enjoy.
I love that. Look at you trying to culture me even further, Brent. I've been going to art museums more now. I reconnected with my creativity this year, and here I'm going to be getting back to reading some novels. So I love it.
Perfect. So Matt, anything to add? We're getting close to an hour, so we got a few more minutes. But anything else that you wanted to highlight in this book?
No, I think for me, this is probably the fastest I've binged a book. And when I say binged, I mean, it wasn't like I read 10 pages a day for 2 weeks. It was like I was sitting down for chunks at a time. And I can tell you that is not the way I love to read a book, because I love to read, reflect, and then get back into reading. So and that was a me thing. But I think the reason that I want to share that to you in the audience is that there's a function of the book you're reading, but then there's also the function of how you read and how you pace it out, how you take it in, whether it's paperback or audiobook. And for those of us in the audience who don't do a lot of reading, or those listeners who don't do a lot of reading, you kind of have to explore those different facets. What's the medium? Is it hard copy? Is it audio? And then how are you going to read it? Is it short bits with some reflection? Are you, would you prefer to binge? And so for me, what I recognized is, I need to really enjoy and take the most from the experience. I need to break it up into smaller chunks. So that's one of the big takeaways for me on this.
Oh, that's good. I think what you're talking about really is reading as a habit is what, which is,
Yes.
daily, every other day kind of thing where you just read something is I think really, really healthy. So good. One thing I wanted to highlight, and I think this is more of those, you're talking bigger picture, which is interesting. And I'm going to go back to something that I wanted to highlight is something that he said about team building is, an empty seat is less damaging than poor fit. And I think this is really important for small businesses too, in two ways. One, I think you got to take the time to hire the right person for the job you want them to fill. But second, don't be afraid to let somebody go that's a poor fit, that's not up to the task, because having them there can cause significantly more problems than having nobody there sometimes. So I think it's getting over that fear of having an empty seat in your business, because if you have the wrong person, it actually is truly worse.
I agree with that. And I'll add to it. One other thing that he said, and I think it may have been in that same chapter, is that he tends to prefer to always run slightly understaffed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that wasn't a revelation. That was, for me, a really interesting validation of what I've seen over the years, where companies will fatten up because there's a certain level, and I'm talking specifically about, small businesses like what our audience run, because there's a certain level of freedom that the owner feels like they want in their lifestyle. And so they keep hiring these people to take on these things. And then eventually the owner actually has less freedom or feels more pressure because it's hard to make money with all of those bodies if you're running slightly overstaffed. And inevitably, and like he talks about in the book, if there's bandwidth on a team, that bandwidth will be consumed by all kinds of stuff. And it's only once you end up being forced to let a few people go and you spread the workload out again, do you realize how fat the organization was. And so I think that for me, that was a huge hit in the book, like hit as in, like, I think a very powerful moment for anybody who's reading books to say, hey, it's probably better to run short staffed and have the team pick up the slack versus, hiring on more bodies and burning a bunch of bandwidth.
Totally. And it's what it gets to, it's a matter of efficiency. As you said, you're going to fill the space. If you fill the space, you're not being efficient. If the collective time of this team is constrained, you will figure out the best use of that. The team will figure out the best use of the time instead of doing stuff that adds zero value. Because I think way too much activity provides zero value.
Yeah.
So those two things, great. I think one other thing I wanted to highlight is I think a lot of people focus on the industry that they're in and that's where their skills are and that's where they have to operate, and people who are out of the industry don't understand it. I want you to look at this guy, right? He went from oil trade, commodities trading, to waste management, to equipment rentals, to logistics software, to all this stuff, not because he was an expert in it, but just because he saw opportunity. Like industry is not a constraint if you're talented. And I think for me, that's both in hiring and in also what you do. Like, be open to the other opportunities out there. I mean, I guess that's just basically how I think generally, but it's relevant. People are afraid to hire somebody that hasn't been in their industry because they don't think they'll get it. If they're talented.
I think where that's the most true is at the highest levels.
Mm-hmm.
As you get closer to the front lines, I believe that's less true.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be exceptions. But I think the closer you are to the front lines, shifting from one industry to the other becomes more difficult.
And, yes. I mean, let's look at trades. Like, yeah, if you're a carpenter, it's really hard to go into plumbing because you don't necessarily have the certifications for it. But honestly, if you know how to handle a tool and you're proficient with handling tools and identifying geometries, it's not that different. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, you can figure it out and give someone a few weeks or a month and they'll probably be pretty good. If they're proficient in one, they'll end up proficient in another. It's having a little patience on the training on the front end if you find someone talented in a trade. Right? And I think people don't want to hire that way though.
Right. I think there's going to be a lot of retraining that we will see as AI continues to chew away at some of the jobs. People will need to retrain. You'll have to
100%.
change industries.
And the trades are going to become a whole lot even more interesting than they are now, because you know what? AI can't swing a hammer.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, cool. Anything? Let's wrapping this up, Matt. Any final comments?
No, I appreciate the suggestion of this book. It probably wasn't one that I would have picked up just based on the title. Not that I don't find making a few $1 billion interesting, but it's not, at the top of my priority list. But I got actually more out of it than I expected, and realized that there's a bunch of alignment between his leadership philosophies and mine. So let's go make a few $1 billion.
Make a few $1 billion. That's awesome. Well, cool. And so, hey, for those of you that want to read along, should be a link for this in the notes to buy the book on Amazon. And if you want to read ahead, the 2 books we're going to read the rest of the year, and maybe leak into 26, are going to be The Entrepreneur's Dilemma by Clay Christensen. That's Matt's picks of the old book. And my pick of the old book is not a business book at all, even though it kind of is. It's called The Long Way by Bernard Mortizier. It's about sailing around the world. So again, this is the Flywheel Effect. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please give us a like, a follow, or share it with someone who you think would find it valuable. And until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the Flywheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources, visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.